Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Oh, the Cassandras are Cassanderizing the classical music industry again. It's such a regular thing, this drumbeat of misery. There have been a bunch of things happening lately, and when I've been looking at the news, it just seems to get ever more dismal. First of all, Joseph Horowitz, who is a splendid writer and fabulous cultural historian, wrote a pretty depressing piece about the end of classical music or orchestras or whatever in America, and about how all that's like going down the tubes, and we're all like, going to be bereft, and really lamenting the fact that classical music no longer has the cultural prominence that it did at one point. And I have some thoughts about that, which we'll get to momentarily. And then, of course, Alex Ross announced his retirement from the New Yorker, prompting Norman Lebrecht to claim that the last classical music critic in America has gone. Yeah, Norman, in your dreams. I loved that headline. It's one of those typical, things that Lebrecht likes to do and make up out of whole cloth to try and make a point. Anyway, here's the bottom line, folks. And I think from a historical point of view, the prominence that classical music had in American culture, to the extent it ever had much of any, was unusual. That was the aberration, not what's happening now. What's happening now is a return to the way things used to be, or to the way things were. I see it in so many different ways. One of the things that people have been lamenting, for example, is the fact that classical music programming on streaming services no longer devotes much time or attention to complete works. And the record companies, too, are breaking up their releases into little bits so that they can sell them by the track. And the track might be a piece of a movement, just the big tune, just some little snippet of something. And that's terrible, because we should be sitting listening to complete works and full things. Well, yes, I think we should, because the complete works are better. I mean, I like it because it's a better way to experience the music, in my view. But the fact of the matter is, complete works, big, long things like that, read Szigeti, Joseph Szigeti's book on his little autobiography on violin playing and on the history of the violin, when violin recitals at the turn of the 20th century consisted almost entirely of small little sniglets. People didn't play big sonatas. That was done at home. Well, today, people are going to play big sonatas at home. Or they're only going to listen to the parts that they like. The music is going to be commodified in the way that it had been in previous epochs. This whole idea we have of Werktreu and critical editions and all that, I love all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I really do. But the way that people consume music is going to be the way that people consume music. They will decide how they want to do it. It's not going to be a top-down kind of ordeal as it has been for a good bit of the 20th century. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I have no idea. It's just a thing. It's what will be, and people will adapt to it. It's the same thing with symphony orchestras. There are way too many symphony orchestras. Way too many symphony orchestras for the amount of people who want to go to them. So there have to be fewer. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The Metropolitan Opera, streams its productions all over the country now in theaters. Does that mean that may hurt local opera and the local performing arts? Quite possibly. Does it mean that a lot of musicians are going to find themselves looking for work? Quite possibly. Is that a bad thing? Well, for them, for sure it is. But is it a bad thing for the body politic? Not necessarily. Things are changing. And the people who believe in what they have to sell, or what they're doing are going to find ways to adapt and adjust. I've said this a million times, but I keep seeing this drumbeat of misery. And of course, that's what we're going to hear, because the vested interests, the classical music military industrial complex, both here and in Europe, they are absolutely panicking over what they see coming. And I mean, I guess they're right to panic. But what I resent is the idea that because they're not getting what they want, things are not happening the way they think they should be happening. That means that culture is going down the tubes. That's such crap. It's absolute nonsense. Yes, classical music is no longer taught in public schools. We don't see it in major newspapers and magazines, but we see it in a lot of other places. You know, in order to make any substantive comments on the state of classical music in the United States, you can't only look at the elite communicative news organs or what's happening amongst certain orchestras or things like that in certain places. I mean, you've got to look at the big picture, which is the entire way that people digest and access and deal with music. I mean, I can only speak from my own personal experience, which is that the reaction I've gotten, for example, to this channel, to the way that we're handling music, has been overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, sure, that you go to Reddit and you see like all these fabulous, I love them, sites about how, I'm evil and, all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is, we're having a very, very good time listening to classical music. Nothing is preventing that. Nothing. There is more access than there has ever been. Are people willing to spend serious money? Are people willing to support the major cultural organizations that for years have stood as sort of iconic models of what high culture ought to be? Maybe not. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens to them as a result of that. I have so little concern for the future of classical music. It's going to have a future. I've said this also a million times. It's going to have a future. It may not be the same as the present or the not too distant past, but it's going to have a future. And we're going to make that future. All of us working together. I also noted, it's really funny. This schadenfreude that comes from Europe with respect to the United States. Everything that happens here that's bad, they're sort of like, they deserve it. Lebrecht said, European conductors don't want to work in the United States. Great! Screw them! Let's have local talent. There's no reason why the talent here isn't as good as the talent there. There's no reason why the composers who we're promoting here aren't as good as the composers that they're promoting over there. What does it matter? The points that these people are making, that to adduce the decadence and decline of classical music culture in this country or in Europe or whatever it is, in a fairly sort of racist trope, Lebrecht said that, we're being supported largely, or maybe he was quoting Horowitz, I don't know, I didn't really pay attention, but the classical music is being supported by immigrant Asians. Good! Classical music was supported by immigrant Jews in the first half of the 20th century. So immigrant Asians have a turn. What is the problem? It's changing. It's changing, and it's going to continue to change in this perpetual ferment that is modern culture, and it will find its level. And its level will probably be like 1% to 2% of the population, which is what it's always been, And will classical music be sidelined completely? Of course it won't be. It's used all the time. One of the things that one of you mentioned that I should be talking about, I wish I could. I'd like to start. I've done a tiny little bit, and I've seen some fabulous work as composers for video games. Because, remember video games started out with like, that was the sound effects. And now they are gloriously scored by major composers who put together huge soundtracks to accompany these things. You see, the question is not whether classical music is going to survive. The question is whether the orchestra will survive. And the orchestra seems to be doing rather well. People love the sound of the orchestra for whatever it's playing, and whether it's playing accompaniments or scores specially composed for video games or films or whatever, the orchestra is doing just fine. So if the orchestra is doing fine, then the repertoire composed for the orchestra will be doing fine. And it's only people's snobbery and elitism, in the worst sense, that prevents them from including all of this other activity in the general field of classical music. I mean, classical music is really a subset of that stuff and the classical repertoire. But as long as people have a taste for the sounds that an orchestra produces, they will have a taste for the classical repertoire written for those orchestras. That's just common sense. And that's one way to look at the issue. Again, these myopic people who are really shills for the current, infrastructure, are not doing anybody any good. Because what we really ought to be doing is celebrating the many ways, the many opportunities people have to access the classics and telling them how to do it, and then turning them loose to do it. It's one of those, if you build it, they will come things. They will. Because those who want it will find it, and the people who don't care won't care, and that's the way it's always been. I just find all of this wailing and moaning, and it's ridiculous. It serves no purpose. It really does. All the naysayers who just talk about how everything is always going down the crapper. I mean, yes, the world, like I said before, the world is a shit show. I mean, things are terrible out there. These people are terrible, and they behave terribly. I mean, you can get hung up on that if you want to, but the fact of the matter is that there are unbelievable opportunities to enjoy and access all kinds of music, classical and otherwise. People are doing it. They're doing it by the millions. I mean, some of you mentioned, let me just close with this thought. Some of you mentioned when I talked about the Andres Nelson's Mahler 5, which is just beyond atrocious. It's just the worst Mahler 5 ever in the world with the Vienna Phil. But it made the top of some streaming audio listening chart or something like this, the most popular classical piece. Well, thousands of millions of people who don't know Mahler's Fifth heard that performance and may delude themselves into thinking that's what Mahler's Fifth sounds like. Well, it is what Mahler's Fifth sounds like in a bad performance, but who cares? I mean, who cares? It topped a chart. I mean, that means that this stuff has legs. It has viability. It has viability through these different media, through these different ways of approaching and accessing classical music. And, if they're all everyone's listening to crappy performances, that's okay. What matters is that they're listening. And if they listen and they care enough, if they really care, they'll listen to another performance. So they'll say, ooh, that sounds different. Maybe they'll start to learn which of the better ones are. But you can't, that's a bonus. What matters is that they make these things and they're able to promote them and people will listen to them. And, I'm not totally Pollyanna-ish. I'm not going to say all's well with the world. But what I do believe is that things are changing. These changes have no particular moral value. There will be winners and losers. And right now, it just seems to me that the loudest voices that we see and hear in the media are the losers. And it's of course they're loud because they're losing. And so they're screaming, that they're losing. And it's someone's fault that they're losing. And the universe is wrong because they're losing. Well, too bad. I mean, it's just too damn bad. Because the world is going to go on, classical music's going to go on, and the shape of things to come is going to be fascinating. And it's our job, or my job, to adapt to what's happening and find ways to use what's happening to continue to promote and speak for and advocate for the glory that is our classical music tradition. And if we do that, we won't have a problem. That I'm sure of. There will be maybe fewer people, maybe more people, maybe different people. Time will tell. And I am looking forward to being able to see what is happening rather than listening to all the moaning and gnashing of teeth and rending of garments and all that. That's just BS. So keep on listening, friends. Let's all just keep on listening and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to us. Take care.